Gentlemen, colleagues, and esteemed guests, we are glad to welcome you to our conference dedicated to artificial intelligence and disinformation, unmasking digital propaganda. During these turbulent times for Ukraine during the war, this topic is not only relevant, but it is also very up-to-date, because war is happening not only on the ground, it is happening in a very complex digital field, and destruction of the cities, destruction of the human lives also results in destroying truth. Disinformation is disseminated online, and it is misleading people and distorting facts. Last year, we all became the witness of the large technological breakthrough and the launch of the chats using GPT, such as ChatGPT, Bard, and other chats by Google and OpenAI. Allowed us to understand that our life will take a very rapid turn, and that we will be interacting in a new way with the technology and will treat information in a new way. But there are also challenges, because this is a double-edged sword. This kind of applications that are using AI can both teach as well as mislead us. And today at our conference, we will be looking at how you can use them in a smart way, using all of the applications, all of the AI tools, and how you can tell the difference between truth and lies, and what legal regulations we need in Ukraine so that we can put it on in order, and what technical solutions will be introduced to tackle disinformation. I'd like to express the gratitude to all the guests and also express the gratitude to our partners, the British Embassy in Ukraine, as without their help, this conference would be impossible. I would like to also thank our partners from the Edinburgh University, Filter, Media Literacy Project, and Digital Communication, and Apple Inform. And of course, I'd like to thank the team of the Innovative Governance Institute for having organized this amazing conference. I hope that you will enjoy this fruitful day and this discussion. And now I'd like to give the floor for welcoming remarks to our colleagues from UK, and namely Alice Workman, Second Secretary, Strategic Communication and Counter Disinformation Unit, British Embassy in Ukraine.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much. So we'd like to welcome everyone both in the room and online to the conference. We're really, really happy to greet representatives, especially from the government of Ukraine, particularly Mr. Taras Shevchenko, the Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine for European Integration, and Mr. Alexei Molchanovsky, Head of Ministry of Digital Transformations Committee on Artificial Intelligence. We're really happy that the FCDO is able to support this important project and this conference initiated by the Institute of Innovative Governance via our Small Projects Fund. We're also glad to see our other partners who are supporting the conference here. So the University of Edinburgh, the National Media Literacy Project, Filter, and also DCN Global and Forum Apollon. Sorry for my pronunciation, by the way. British Embassy Kyiv recognizes the critical need to address this issue on identifying and combating AI-generated propaganda. We also have a much wider portfolio combating disinformation, and I'm really happy to speak to anyone about this area of work. We hope that this event, which brings together leading experts from Ukraine and around the world, will explore the role of artificial intelligence technologies in the spread of disinformation, and will be an opportunity to exchange ideas and solutions. We would also like to reiterate the importance of a collaborative effort to tackle the challenges of disinformation and propaganda in the digital age, and announce that another conference will take place later this year in Lviv. And finally, we would like to thank you and give a big thank you to the organizers, the IIG, and in particular to Anna Mysyshyn, is that? For their energy and insights and brilliant work on the preparation of this conference. Thank you very, very much. Дякую.
Дякую велике. Також я рада запросити зараз до вітальних.
Thank you so much. And now I'd like to give the floor to the Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine for European Integration, Taras Shevchenko. The floor is yours.
Дуже дякую.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. Welcome on behalf of the acting Minister of Culture and Information Policy, Mr. Karandeyev. Topic of disinformation is one of the main tracks of work of the ministry. Both prior to the full-scale invasion and currently, it has always been a top priority for us. So today's event is clearly important as it allows us to discuss these priority matters. And the key document that we're working with is Strategy of Information Security, and the action plan attached to it provides for a number of strategic goals that pertain to today's event that have to do with tackling disinformation, also media, digital literacy, governmental communications, which also are important. But I'd like to emphasize that information security for us is also about protecting journalists' rights, access to public information, and these objectives are also outlined in the strategy. The key objectives and the key task, especially, this is the task that I'm dealing with, when the Center for Strategic Communication was established, which became a very important player, and the media literacy project that later on was titled Filter, and who is the co-organizer of today's event. Well, I'm not gonna take a lot of your time for the welcome remarks. We're only saying hi to each other, and I will be presented during the next panel. So once again, I would like to express the gratitude to all the partners and all those who helped us to organize today's event. Thank you. Also, I'd like to give the floor to the head of innovations at Ukraine Catholic University and the head of the Ministry of Digital Transformations Committee on Artificial Intelligence, Alexei Molchanovsky. He's with us online. Over to you. Thank you for having me. And I would like to thank the Institute of Innovative Governance for having organized this conference. Just a few words about our committee. This is the Expert and Consultation Advisory Committee dedicated to artificial intelligence, and it was founded with the leading business people and experts. It was established back in 2019, and we are providing advice to the ministry in terms of this topic specifically. And in 2020, our committee was developing the concept for the development of artificial intelligence domain, which was approved by the decree of the Cabinet of Ministers in December 2020. Currently, there are more than 50 experts from different walks of life in our committee. There are teachers, professors, academia, engineers, owners of the companies, founders of the companies, and government representatives. There are four main tracks of work: education and science, regulating AI, using AI in governance, as well as safety and security matters. And in the context of today's conference, I would like to tell a little bit about how we are regulating AI now and how we're dealing with that, because I believe that for all those who are following this topic understand how important it is. Europe is preparing to pass the legislation on artificial intelligence in the EU, and given Ukraine's Euro integration aspirations, we have to also join this process. Over the last 2 months, our committee, together with the Ministry of Digitalization, also had meetings with the representatives of government and business. And as a result of discussions on regulation, we have realized that we have to do the following. We understand. I'm sorry that I'm interrupting. You will be able to go in depth during the panel discussion. These are just welcoming remarks. So we would very much appreciate if you could tell us more about it during this second panel. Okay, then I'd like to wish everyone a fruitful conference. Okay, we will get back to you during the second panel. Friends, now we're gonna move on to the first panel. It is information, ethical and legal regulation in Ukraine and the EU. And I would like to give the floor to the moderator, Valeria Kovtun, head of the National Media Literacy Project, Filter, as well as all of the panelists.
Всіх вітаю. Так, наша сьогоднішня
Good
панель буде
afternoon, everyone. Our today's panel will be related to the issues of AI regulation and countering propagation of disinformation with the use of AI. I'm very happy that we were able to get together with such esteemed experts, and I am convinced that this discussion is a timely event, and I'm very glad that it takes place in Kyiv, given all the threats that we have. It seems to me that AI accelerated the process of propagation of disinformation, and the process became even more creative. I do remember that when we started our lectures on media literacy during the time of war, and we were showing the video with Zelensky, who was calling on Ukrainian troops to put down arms, and it was a deep fake. It was obvious to everyone that that was a fake, but now the quality has changed, and it is not that obvious whether a deep fake is actually fake or not. Therefore, we have to consider all these issues, and we need to diminish the threat of disinformation. So today we will talk about the technological progress and how to prevent its facilitation at the expense of democratic freedoms. And now I would like to announce our speakers. Olga Petri from SEDEM, Ministry of Digital Transformation AI Committee, and Taras Shevchenko, Deputy Minister of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine. And we also have Rozkladai, Deputy Director of the Center for Democracy and Rule of Law. We are also joined by Dr. Rachel Kraut-Smith, media lawyer from the University of Edinburgh, and Dr. Paolo Cavaliere, Senior Lecturer in Digital Media and IT Law, Co-Director of the Scottish Research Center for Intellectual Property and Technology Law. Could we see our speakers on the screen as well? And while we are waiting for our online speakers to join, I suggest we start our discussion with the Ukrainian context. Given that we are short of time, I suggest us to try to be as concise as possible. Please keep your responses within 3-minute limit. And if you have any questions, please ask them after the inputs from our speakers during informal communication. So I have the first question to Olga. She is a practitioner and she has seen with her own eyes all these manipulations in the context of Ukraine. Olga, do you think that artificial intelligence already changed the way the information is spread in Ukraine? What are the recent trends? This is Olga Yurkova, co-founder of StopFake. Thank you so much for having me here. Speaking about the topic of the information spread in Ukraine, let's start with deepfakes. You mentioned the deepfake with Zelensky. Deepfake is a technology that is already rather advanced. So basically, you could create the technology, you could create the deepfake that is not that distinguishable from the original, but this technology is not that widespread in Ukraine or in Russia. You do remember that the deepfake with Zelensky, it was of rather primitive, basic quality. We see that the voice is different, the way the lips are moving does not coincide with the reality, but it takes a lot of time to create a high quality deep fake, because it takes time to learn for the neural network how to imitate the particular voice. You need to feed a lot of input data into the neural network. And it is possible. There are deepfakes of a different quality. For instance, in the US in 2020, there was a pre-electoral campaign, and there was the videos with the dictators who were saying that democracy is under threat. And they were rather convincing. You could search for them online. Another thing to mention is AI-generated texts, as at the moment, in Ukrainian media environment, they are not that numerous. Why? Because AI is not using the Ukrainian language. They have not learned how to use the Ukrainian language. Therefore, I see that some of the bloggers are using AI, and it is pretty obvious. But it doesn't mean that tomorrow AI wouldn't be able to learn and to master the Ukrainian language as well. And the scale of this disinformation would be so huge, this would be unstoppable. I'm talking about massive disinformation campaigns that we might be facing in the future. There is a research in the English in the English media environment. Twitter and tweets that were generated by AI were very similar to the real tweets, and they were basically indistinguishable from the real tweets. At this point in time, Ukraine is not suffering that much from this issue. And another aspect to pay attention to, we see that there are some clickbaits that are generated by AI in the internet, spreading the pieces of news about things being going really bad. And there are many communities, many pages in on social networks, and Ігор Розкладай could tell us more how they are detecting this kind of misleading information on Facebook, basically. That is the wartime propaganda that is aimed at undermining the spirit of Ukrainians, but the quality of it is rather low, and this is primitive at this point in time. Thank you so much. I think that generating images and understanding when it is actually relevant and when not, I'm sure that you remember the case in Dnipro with the boy that was used to show the scale of grief. Well, this is about the ethics among the journalists. So sometimes it looks like a child, just like a game. But if we're talking about the wartime context, it is not that innocent. At this point in time, this question is more to Olga Petrov, Shevchenko, and Igor Rozkladai. What are the practical steps that are already taken by the Ukrainian government towards the big tech companies' cooperation in order to counter and to prevent the propagation of disinformation? Are there any practical steps already taken? Who would like to start? Is Olga Petrov? Yes, sure, I would like to start. First and foremost, I would like to pay attention to what Alexei Molchanovsky has mentioned. At this point in time, there is the committee operational, and we are working on best practices to counter deepfakes, dissemination, and prevention, so that we could respond at early stage, and so that we could take steps so that these practices were not widespread in big tech companies. We had the strategic session with the representatives of big tech companies, and we discussed the potential regulation. We voiced the concerns on our side and heard the concerns on behalf of the big tech companies. And in this regard, we should also speak about the regulations that are not covered by the primary law or bylaws, the initiatives that could also enhance the process of interaction between the government and big tech companies so that we could help big tech companies to use the tools that will be used in the European Union in the nearest future so that the disinformation is not disseminated, so that at the stage of developing at this point in time when AI is just generating the content, and if it is disinformation, it should be prevented. Are there any methods that you are using right now? Could you be more specific? Really good area, sandbox. Sandbox is envisaged by the AI Act. I don't know if everyone is aware of what kind of document that is. AI Act is the piece of legislation in the European Union that would be regulating the sphere of AI. Probably it will be finalized and passed in spring 2024. But regarding big tech companies and AI developers, Huderia is a methodology that would be used to assess whether the products of AI are violating the human rights and the rules of democracy. And it could be used by the developers of AI, and it would also assist us in terms of preventing the dissemination of disinformation. Another legal tool that is envisaged by the AI Act, that is the sandbox. A sandbox means the controlled environment in which, from the very first step, the AI developers at the stage of design understand how they could develop their system in such a way that it would comply with the norms, with the regulations that are covered by AI Act. Speaking about disinformation, and in this context, the requirements to AI, if complied with, disinformation and the very probability that AI would be used to disseminate the disinformation would become lower. It means that Huderia and Sandbox are the steps that our government could take, and besides, we could have the white book, the white list. That would help both businesses and civil society in terms of understanding where the government is moving towards, how the AI systems could be used and misused as well. But this approach is more of a guidance to the government. But at the same time, it would help for the society at large to be aware of the risks and to understand how the regulation will take place and what actions could be taken in terms of the AI systems regulation. Those are the steps that does not oblige us at this very stage, at this point in time, to implement all the norms, but at the same time, they would help us in terms of setting the requirements for the AI developers, so that the procedure of criteria and sandbox could be applied. And Huderia has already signed the agreement with us on the preliminary participation. Besides, we agreed that the pilot sandbox mechanism would be used in Ukraine as well. So if we have the public-private partnership in Ukraine, in this domain, that would assist us in manipulations with AI in terms of dissemination disinformation. Thank you. And what about big companies? Maybe Ігор Розкладай will share the perspective of big companies. Good afternoon. We have the status of trusted partner for Meta since 2019. Speaking about big companies, well, they are not telling much to us, and we do not have much of the evidence. But when we speak about AI systems, well, it is not an AI full AI. That is why we are sitting here, because I don't know what we will do in 3 years, 30 years time. In Stanford, they told us that you have 23 years, as there are some systems that could work with big data sets. And at this point in time, the social networks are using AI systems. They're using AI, for instance, for detection of the image with a swastika, for instance, and also to detect the hate speech and some activities of that resemble suicide, for instance, the shooting and suicide in New Zealand. There are 3 billion of subscribers for Facebook only, and they have the operational centers, but it is impossible to check it all manually in Dublin or in Morocco or in every state. The content that is generated is so massive that AI should be used. And there is an issue with this kind of interaction, because when we talk about satire, or when we are talking about stories, as many of satire images that were posted by some publics on Facebook, sometimes these images are removed as those that contain the hate speech. And my favorite case, my colleague has heard about this case before. This is the case when the image was deleted, and that was the image of Hitler, who was smiling and talking on the phone, and there was the caption, how about monitoring the situation? So everyone understands the context of this picture. So the Russia was offering something, the aggressor is monitoring the situation, and this historic photos cause a lot of concern and are removed. Well, in this particular case, I was very curious, but this systems actually help, because starting April this year, Olga has mentioned that there are attacks, phishing attacks, and as the publicity is used, the advertisement, to spread disinformation, as Russians are using not just disinformation but malinformation, which means that those are the real cases that are blown up to a totally different scale. And whether those links, 1,000 links that were passed on to Meta this year, I hope that we will have actually some tangible outcome of this effort. But those profiles that are generating this kind of information are removed within 24 hours. So that is the positive improvement. And I know that there are some messages like your page will be deleted within 24 hours. Click on this link. This is the phishing, and this is the page where you are to enter your login and your password, and then your data are stolen. We see that the the cooperation of individuals with Meta. This is one of the probable ways to counter disinformation and solve the issue of disinformation. The most difficult part is that the Russians are learning their lessons as well at the same time, and unfortunately they are not only using the advertising, they are also bombarding the big pages with the comments that contain disinformation, and it is rather difficult to counter this kind of effort. I'm very grateful to those colleagues who are here today, who are providing us with all this information that we are analyzing and that we are passing on further. And one more thing to mention about AI. AI is not just the benefit or a threat. As you know, you can use the hammer to kill someone, or you can use it to hang a picture on the wall. So when we are generating the images from museums, for instance, for Salvador Dali, this is my favorite, and we have cameras, CCTV cameras in cities of Ukraine with a face recognition feature. So AI could pose a threat to democracy in those areas that are rather unexpected for us. Well, from my experience, I see a lot of posts that are aimed at inciting hatred and inciting hatred between different groups of Ukrainians, those who stayed in Ukraine and those who fled abroad. And the comments, this topic is actually triggering. So some comments are actually real. This problem actually exists, but then it is blown up to a different scale. Well, from my perspective, 90% that this disinformation from Russians does not actually work, but there is disinformation that is used just as probing, as looking for our weaknesses. And one of these weaknesses that was used recently is the topic of corruption. And it was triggering, therefore, users were simply reposting, we're fighting over this issue. And we do understand that we have to be reasonable and we have to keep the common sense. Well, in order to keep common sense and to be critical, use critical thinking, we have filter project, and maybe Taras Shevchenko would tell us more about the role of the government, not from the point of view of private cooperation with big techs, but maybe Ukrainian government was reaching out.
Привітати мого давнього друга Павла Кавальєрі, якого я бачу на екрані. Дуже радий бачити на цьому заході. Павло, very happy to see you here. З приводу державних регуляцій, враховуючи те, що наша панель називається етичне праворегулювання, то, звісно, на сьогоднішній момент для нас лідером регулювання є Європейський Союз. Digital Markets Act, Digital Service Act, і на сьогодні, які вже є, і розробка нового Artificial Intelligence Act для ЄС, який все-таки значно краще досягає своїм юридичним регулюванням великі бігтех-компанії, які змушені рахуватись з цими актами, та фактично відбувається тестування і встановлення правил, на які ми сподіваємось також бути.
And they are testing their rules, and we hope that this will be working for us so that it can be adopted in Ukraine too, and hopefully we will join the EU soon, and that these regulations will also cover Ukraine. Speaking about ministries, I'd like to say that the Ministry for Digital Transformation, which is the leading ministry dealing with that, is also working together with our colleagues, because media and information, and in terms of the European integration, we are also working together in one larger society where media and other information matters are all interconnected. Speaking about ethical regulation, we're talking more about media, right? And the possible approach is creating co-regulation tools that are enshrined in the law on media. When the industry, together with the regulatory body, with the National Broadcasting Council, can create additional rights for doing business. And I believe that AI matters should be the subject matter of such co-regulation, because all of the examples that were mentioned today were about spreading information on social media, but also about spreading information that could have been generated by AI in both traditional as well as new media. And the law on media also says that online media can register as a media. Yet another approach, in my opinion, is awareness raising and education. Our colleagues from Filter Project, they're the ones who are doing the job with media literacy, new opportunities for fakes. And that's why people require explanation. And let me give you one example. An assumption that critical thinking and doubt can now happen even more frequent. When people who go on social media every single day know better that the picture might look very good, but it might be generated by the artificial intelligence. And I saw multiple examples with some well-known personalities, with the Pope. You see that, you know, sometimes I'm scrolling and I see that there was a dog that is 2 meters tall. And it looks like Baskerville's dog. And there might be people who would think that this could be the real dog, but most people would probably understand using their critical thinking that there never have been dogs 2 meters tall. And before artificial intelligence came into being, you could also use pictures for disinformation. For example, a picture in the wrong context, say a picture of a real existing human being saying that this and that person did this and that, and everybody writes dozens of bad comments, but in fact, this person has not done anything. Their picture was simply attached. Or I remember when together with the colleagues, we also opened the Media Literacy Labyrinth in Slavudic, and there were examples with pictures that were zoomed in or zoomed out. And one, you could see how the dog is biting a sheep. And then you look at a bigger picture and you realize that actually the dog is not biting the sheep, but trying to pull it out of the river because the sheep was drowning. Remember my friends from Kazakhstan who would say back in 2014 during the Revolution of Dignity to us, well, we understand that Russians lie and manipulate, but we do not understand how. We see a video. This is a real video, right? And those also were the attempts to manipulate, and they were quite powerful. And when now people say that there also can be video generated by AI, or that a picture can be generated by an AI, and joint awareness raising, critical thinking, doubting it, I think might also help us in life. Thank you. Thank you so much. We will get back to other ways. Now I'd like to give the floor to our online speakers. And the question to Dr. Paula and Dr. Rachel. Which challenges in terms of regulating AI to prevent disinformation did EU countries come with, or the countries globally? And did the war in Ukraine make them change their approaches or look at them from a new angle? So who's ready to go first? Yes, sure. Dr. Crawford, go ahead. But we cannot hear you. There must be some technical difficulties. We cannot hear you, Dr. Crawford, Dr. Crowdsmith.
That should be better. You can hear me now? Yes, good. Okay. First of all, thank you very briefly for inviting me. Excellent conference and really timely. Just to say, I think from this perspective at a very high level, we need to think about different dimensions of the problem. So in terms of the question about the challenges in Europe for states and regulation in relation to disinformation, one set of questions relates to actually the target of our regulation, defining disinformation and thinking about whether it's legitimate for states to intervene at all and at what point states can intervene. So in relation to a lot of information which is false, it may be protected speech under freedom of expression. So one interesting aspect in terms of the development of the different ways and different bases on which states target various forms of disinformation, it might be through inaccuracy, but it might be challenging aspects of that speech that they don't like, which is hate speech. In Ukraine, we've seen the use, I think, of propaganda for war. And so one question is to what extent states are experimenting or possibly introducing new forms of intervention, and that might be one. And then another aspect would be the use of sanctions and foreign policy initiatives at the EU level, which we haven't seen before, to try and tackle a coordinated attack and a coordinated problem. And then you've got the point that was made earlier about what are the strategies, to what extent should states intervene? Should they be using state regulation? Should they be using self-regulation as their main goal? Or should they be employing forms of co-regulation? And we can see across Europe, I think, a shift towards, in recognition of the limits of self-regulation, these co-regulatory techniques. And I think my colleague Paolo probably will speak a bit about the DSA, but in the UK, we've just had almost the end of a legislative process for the online safety bill, which is introducing new techniques for overseeing intermediaries, and in particular, focusing on this idea of safety by design, and that algorithms are also operated in a way that will protect users. And in that context, there are some quite specific provisions about the nature of the algorithms and the assessment process that needs to be undertaken by the online intermediaries in designing their services, and in particular to ensure that illegal content is not included. So it goes back again to that question about how we define the offences. Are we dealing with hate speech or a lack of balance or disinformation in some way, or propaganda for war? What are we including within that? And then I think a third tier that one needs to be aware of is actually what the techniques are that can be used. And to some extent, it may not be the conduct, so it might not be the content so much that we want to tackle, but actually the conduct. And it's identifying these forms of inauthentic bots relaying information in order to magnify it artificially, which might be in some ways more important than focusing on specific forms of content. And then the final tier I think one needs to be aware of is the form of sanctions and resources that are put into these systems. They're likely to be very expensive. The UK has got a mechanism for requiring those participants in the system to actually pay fees. How is the oversight to be funded? Should we rely simply on fines and sanctions within these new regimes that are being introduced? Or can we also rely on other civil law systems, which might include ideas of negligence or defective products that can also be used to impose additional pressures on the providers of these services to make sure that they are responsive to state and citizens' concerns in these areas? Thank you.
Thank you. The next question is to Paula. Maybe you'd like to add something to what Dr. Rachel just said, and maybe also there are some thoughts in terms of war and disinformation coming from Russia, the operations that have been stepped up now, given the use of artificial intelligence.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me echo what Rachel just said. I'm really thankful for this invitation to this brilliant conference, and I'm very happy to see a few colleagues and friends like Taras, Igor. I used to come to Ukraine for different projects once or twice a year, before the war, and I very much hope it will be possible to do it again very soon. I think, yes, there's quite a lot to say about how the European Union is trying to respond to the rise of disinformation in general, and more specifically through automated means. And there's also quite an interesting dynamic and interplay with the war in Ukraine, and how this has perhaps solicited new questions or a new urgency. I think it needs to be clear from the start that we don't really have one general framework. There's a few horizontal instruments that the European Union has put together or is in the process of approving. So of course we have the DSA, like was just mentioned before, that deals with the conduct of digital platforms, which also includes risks associated with propaganda in general, disinformation in general. And then there's the AI Act, which is apparently in the latest stages of approval, which deals with artificial intelligence in general, and that also touches on the possible use of artificial intelligence in the media sphere. So it's again a bit of a piecemeal approach in a way, or we need to find the relevant provisions from different frameworks. The DSA, I think, in particular, is interesting and promising in a number of ways, especially for, I think, the new regulatory principles that it seems to apply. And then other aspects of it are more conflictual, or at least a bit more, they can give rise to concerns. In particular, I think, when it comes to its application, that could be, the implementation will be, I think, more problematic, more difficult than it might be anticipated on paper. I think the regulatory approach, this new regulatory approach, I think is particularly interesting and promising, and really to some extent builds on an understanding of also what's been going on in Ukraine. So there's this combination of some traditional top-down rules that are imposed on platforms, like for instance, platforms are now requested to put some content moderation processes in practice. And then there's a strong element of co-regulation also, where platforms are requested to put in place some form of risk management of their own design in a way. So there's this combination of two elements, which I think is promising, and in principle also in a way potentially successful, because on the one hand it allows authorities to draw on a broader pool of expertise from the industry. It allows authorities also to mobilize industry players who, for different reasons, might be in the best position to take action when problems arise. So on that, that is promising. The most encouraging aspect, I think, is also the fact that by creating obligations of a certain kind, rather than just having platforms do it voluntarily, I think it's also important to stress, this is a parenthesis, it's important to stress that many of the top-down requirements that are now included in the DSA, so the non-co-regulatory elements, in a large part, it's things that platforms were doing already to some extent, like content moderation, on a more or less voluntary basis, like for instance in the Code of Conduct on Hate Speech, that we have since 2016. But now that there is a legal underpinning, if for any reason platforms stop doing it, like for instance we have seen Twitter, or now X, doing it recently, if for any reason platforms stop doing it, now authorities have more of a stronger say, and they can keep them accountable. So providing some form of underpinning to the type of actions that platforms were doing voluntarily, I think is good. So that's the good part, and I think it's a model that can be replicated elsewhere as well. Where I think there is a bit more of a conundrum is the extent to which this is a content neutral framework, and there's still quite a academic debate about it. A lot of it will depend on how the Commission will interpret its role in overseeing the whole mechanism. Rachel, of course, was mentioning before whether we should be tackling content or conduct. There is a widespread understanding that the DSA tackles conduct more than content. There is an expectation that it would do so, but at the same time, I think, and this is also where the situation in Ukraine has also contributed to make the conversation in Europe a bit more confused. I think to an extent now there is a degree of confusion within the European Union, the authorities, but also the public at large, as to what should be the ultimate goal of the DSA, whether the DSA is also expected to help platforms restrict or take down content that is lawful but nonetheless harmful, or whether the question whether or not the Commission, for instance, now has the power to impose content-specific obligations on platforms in its overseeing, in the exercise of its oversight powers, or not. This is still very much to be understood. It will depend in practice on how the application, interpretation of the provisions are put in place when the time comes. But by and large, I think what is also important with the DSA is that now it puts in place a wider range of tools, a broader toolkit that authorities and the industry can use to tackle content that is harmful or illegal. And depending on what problem arises in practice, they can resort to different means that seem more proportionate to the situation. So for instance, when the content is harmful but lawful, the authorities could expect platforms to resort to conduct-based actions, like for instance, limiting the distribution, limiting the monetization, limiting the circulation of this type of content. And when the content is instead unlawful, authorities will have the power to intervene. So I think this flexibility and the potential for a graduated approach based on a broader toolkit than before is important and quite promising. But there still is confusion about what we aim to achieve, because of course disinformation has many facets and can trigger many risks. It's a broad category in and by itself. And so these are questions that remain to be solved. And then when it comes to AI specific, I think there's also a slightly different approach from the Artificial Intelligence Act. The main gist of the Artificial Intelligence Act is that different types of technologies are ranked for the type of risk that they are more likely to be triggered. So with the latest version, I believe, the one where the Parliament has proposed a number of amendments, for instance, algorithmic recommender systems will be classified as high risk in any case, and this means that any such content would be flagged up with some form of reminder or flag for the user so that they can know it's AI generated. I think in principle, I can understand why the European Union authorities might want to emphasize transparency and user empowerment so much. This is also, I think, more or less in line with what Taras was saying before, the value of awareness raising and so on and so forth. But I have to say I'm slightly skeptical in this sense. Of course, I think this idea of flagging up AI-generated content would only work on the two bases that AI content is inherently negative. So therefore, when the user sees the flag, immediately reacts to it, knowing that this is content to be aware of. And also it's predicated on the basis that the AI-generated content is, to some extent, the minority of what we see around us. neither of the two things is necessarily true. AI content, like some other speaker was saying before, can also be very positive. It's widely used in quality journalism as well. And I was just reading a study from a university in Copenhagen, I think a couple of days ago. They predict that by 2030, 99% of the content we read on the internet will be AI generated. So at that point, I'm just concerned that any such flag will be another disclaimer of the type of this website uses cookies that we see all the time and we don't really pay attention to. So I think when it comes to specifically tackling the risk of AI generated content, we might want to focus more on the content again, or at least the risks that are out there more than on the type of technology, because very soon the technology might become so pervasive that there's nothing else around and it's not inherently bad.
Thank you so much. Thank you for such a detailed response. It is hard to understand the balance between what can be regulated and what cannot be regulated by the European Commission and which lines should not be crossed. And in March 2023, the open letter to big tech companies was by the representatives of the EU countries' government, and they recommended to take a few steps for the big tech companies to assist holding disinformation back. And there are three main steps among them. So I suggest that we think about them, whether they are realistic. And if we can demand something like that from the big tech, first is create an acceptable or free access to the platform so that we understand the tactics and methods of the company that manipulate. The second one is the platforms should dedicate enough staff and financial resources for the effective regulations and to moderate the content, especially if we're talking about hate speech, because you gave the examples. AI does not understand satire, and you need a real human being to go through it. And the third one, the platforms have to clearly tag deep fakes and the tags that was AI generated. Therefore, we have to constantly invest into the tools to discover this defect. So these are the three bullet points that can be found at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website, and it was signed by several representatives of the EU countries' governance. Is it realistic? Asking big tech companies about that. And what else should be added to that list? Because Paolo already suggested lots of ideas. But how about we think about more recommendations?
Well, let me start. Any flagging should be a smart one. Now, let me give you an example, and it's a funny case. On Facebook, from time to time, you see the flags that the content is misleading or inaccurate, incorrect. We have our colleagues from Stop Fake over there. They know that the content could be flagged as incorrect. And they remain there. And there was a journalist who was begging the journalist not to use the photos from other tragedies to feature the information about Nowa Kachovka on the hydropower plant, and his post was flagged as inaccurate information. Why so? Because he used the examples, he used the photos from Vietnam, from other disasters, from other natural disasters that were used by other journalists to show and to feature the story about Ukraine. So the context was not used by Facebook. They flagged it as inaccurate information. So it requires manual regulation and moderation. In the case of COVID, the first case of the claims on Facebook when they were forced to give the rebuttal, and when they had to fire some of their moderators. And the time for reviewing the complaints was extended substantially. There were some complaints that were under review for 3 months. And it's business. So under certain conditions, a business would act its own interests. And therefore, we have to see this from the business perspective. So we need to incentivize the companies to have better moderation and to give them some carrots for it. And just bridging the ethical issues and ethical moderation. I'm sure it's no wonder that due to the law on media, Suspilne, public broadcaster in Ukraine, is now changing its founding charter and code of ethics. And I added the following provision: any content that is artificially generated, except for the archival information, should be flagged as so, should be tagged as artificially generated. And this is how we could solve the issue, or at least regulate it. Dear colleagues online, do you have anything else to add in terms of the requirements and anything to add with regard to what Igor has just said?
I can say just something very quickly. I think the point about commercial incentives is a really key one. I think that's a really interesting point. If anyone's interested, the case in the US about the Facebook inclusion of hate speech that led to, or may have had some role in encouraging the abuse of the Rohingya minority in Myanmar, discusses the way in which the system of likes and sharing, which are used within these platforms, tends to greatly increase the spread of extreme content. I don't know what you can do about that, but I think that is definitely a problem. The whole way in which the business is set up in order to encourage the sharing of this more extreme content, I think, is a problem. And the second thing, just to add to this list, is just the concern that's arisen in the UK, which is in closed end-to-end encrypted services, WhatsApp, these kinds of services. It's very difficult to know what's going on behind them. So one really important issue will be how these are being addressed by these new forms of regulation that are going through. Thank you.
Thank you. Paolo, do you have anything to add?
Yes, possibly. But apart from saying that I agree with what the other colleagues were saying now, I think this list of wishes from the open letter to tech companies is in principle agreeable. I think it's fundamentally correct to expect them to do such things. The extent to which all of the platforms will have the necessary capacity and resources to do this, especially when it comes to moderation, is less certain. I'm not as sure. But I think this also reflects what is often a problem when it comes to the policy and regulation of platforms, that it always seems to be done in a way on the larger size. Policymakers, lawmakers often think of the biggest platforms and not as often that much smaller players exist in the industry. Now, of course, the DSA has partially corrected that trajectory, introducing the category of very large platforms. But of course, any such demands should be very carefully tailored to the size and capacity of each industry player. But I think more in general, it also potentially speaks to a problem with a degree of wishful thinking that sometimes we find when we tackle these problems. That technology will be a bit of a magic wand that will fix all the issues. I think it would be, apart from spelling out what are the expectations from, but it would be important at the regulatory level to provide a more precise determination of what are the boundaries of platform responsibilities, what authorities expect platforms to bear responsibility for and what not. I think this idea of systemic risk that the DSA brings in is, again, encouraging to a large extent. I think the very notion of systemic extent is important also because it seems to be largely based on this idea of collective or diffuse harms that was surprisingly missing from the initial stages of the whole policy discussion surrounding fake news first and then disinformation. There was more of an emphasis on individual harms. So this idea of systemic risks that are harmful to at the collective level, I think is very important. But at the same time, the notion is so broad that by just asking platforms to assess the risks, we're basically asking platforms to assess a little bit of everything. I think especially in order to keep platforms accountable, it would be important also to set the limits of what responsibilities they are legally expected to bear a bit more precisely.
Thank you. Of course, we cannot ask everything from the platforms, and this is a work in progress, and this is a collective effort. So this is the question now to Ms. Olga and Taras. What do we do? Should we ask for more from big tech companies? Should we call some media literacy trainings? Should we explain how to use Midjourney, that anyone could use Midjourney, generate content and become political analyst for a day? Or should we run some awareness campaign? Should we add some information to the school curriculum? Well, I would like also to respond to what has just been mentioned, as we were talking about the data that are posted on platforms, on social networks. The investigative journalists need to know how information is spread. Those who are fighting with the disinformation need to understand how the information is disseminated on platforms, and we need to understand the algorithms, because maybe they also play its role in their role in dissemination of disinformation. I do agree that this is collective responsibility. This is not just the responsibility of the platform or of those who are generating deep fakes. They might be created with some good purpose, but there should be the information that these are deep fakes. But of course, we cannot expect of all deep fake generators to become very conscious overnight. And on the other hand, the authorities have to control, have to regulate the sphere, but to a certain limit, and should not cross this limit. But usually those people who are disseminating and sharing fakes, those are the common users, the normal users, and they should bear their part of responsibility as well. The way I see this problem and how it could be solved, it is by means of media literacy and literacy. Taras Shevchenko is aware that we have the pilot project, media literacy at school. We have exercises for school children who are attending high schools, and they are taught how to interact with different content. They are taught how to create content, and I do agree that this kind of skills should be taught at school, and maybe even earlier, at earlier stages, starting from kindergarten already, preschools even. As when children understand how it works, they are unlikely to fall prey for disinformation, as they will be able to analyze the information. And this chain of spreading disinformation, and usually we are talking about normal users, when people are emotional, and it's also the matter of trust. When I see my friend spreading some information, I will share it as well, as I trust this person. And when person becomes media literate and AI literate, it breaks this chain of spreading disinformation. Lifelong learning, I should say, as AI is learning and evolving, and we should catch up with this evolution. Taras Shevchenko, do you have anything to add? With regard to media literacy, digital literacy, yes, I do agree. And with regard to what has been just said in terms of asking more of the big tech companies or asking less of big tech companies, the tactics that were used by some countries with the self-regulation media, why media agreed to regulate themselves. Well, the trick was as follows. The government starts working on some regulations with very stringent measures, and then the government is offering for the sector to develop their own standards, some softer standards, and threatening them to intervene with more stringent measures if those soft measures do not work. Maybe we should use the same trick with AI. Okay, noted. I also wanted to add, speaking about private-private partnership and flagging the content, this is the opinion that is shared by many representatives of our community. There should be self-regulation with the business elaborating best practice and other companies following the lead. That is exactly echoing what Mr. Shevchenko has said. It's better to be compliant with certain requirements that you create rather than to sit and wait until the sphere is regulated and over-regulated. But at the same time, there is the need for interaction with business to take place, to see that some top companies are willing to cooperate and that they are flagging their content. Thank you. And here comes one of the final questions, and then we will take questions from the audience. Speaking about the current context, the context of the war, but 2024 is the year of elections in the US, in South Korea, in Indonesia, in Asian countries, and it means that in these electoral campaigns, the AI tools would be definitely used, the cutting-edge AI tools would be used. So how do we safeguard these processes, and how do we safeguard ourselves from manipulations? Well, there is this rule, just count to 10. If you see some video, if you see something that makes you feel too emotional, just ask yourself, who is spreading that information? Why this information is spread? Which is the source for this information? And this is the main rule for disinformation and fraudulent information. I'm sure you do remember Nancy Pelosi and Cello fake story when these normal video was slowed down by 25% only, and it looked like she was drunk. This is the primitive technology. This is not even new. And we see that the deep fakes that were generated in 2017 and deep fakes that are generated now are worlds apart. We started working with digital avatars, and this is a story that is even more fascinating. Therefore, we should be cautious about getting too emotional about the content. We need to bear in mind how it works. You have to doubt the content. You have to ask yourself those questions. And these recent stories, recent cases, my colleague, journalist, found this image that was very improbable. It didn't look plausible. It was the photo from Odessa, but when we saw another image, actually, it turned out that it was real. I do think that it is all about education, media literacy. All right. Anyone else? And just try to be concise. Rachel, Paula, I see that you were willing to add something.
Yes, just a few words. The EU obviously has been very involved in this, following on from Paolo's discussion. So the Digital Services Act has some quite specific provisions on advertising, the transparency of advertising, and as a result also of the Code of Conduct on Disinformation. We're getting much more information about the practices and the algorithms and the information decisions that are being taken by online platforms in terms of political advertising and advertising that could be relevant for elections. So I think, if you're interested in it, to look particularly at the transparency resources that are there in relation to the Code of Conduct on Disinformation. There's some quite interesting stuff about access to information about advertising in this context. And of course, we've also got proposals by the EU to have a specific piece of regulation dealing with the transparency of political advertising. So there are definitely important steps that are being taken in the EU that could be helpful in this respect. And just as a side note, it's quite interesting that obviously the EU reacted with the sort of national security measures, almost common foreign and security policy in relation to Russian propaganda in relation to the war in Ukraine. The US has also made quite extensive use of national security measures in order to tackle Russian propaganda. And one of the first instances in which they came to involve that in relation to Russian media outlets was in relation to interference in the 2016 US elections. I'm not saying that it's necessarily a good thing to use these techniques, but it's interesting to see that states are using things like national security in order to try and address propaganda threats in the context of elections, not just in the context of war. Thank you.
Thank you. Paolo, would you like to also
Thank you.
add?
Very briefly, if I may, yes. So Rachel has just mentioned the European Union discussing, as we speak, new possible regulation on political advertising, and this is still in the making, but I understand the European Union authorities are hoping to have the regulation in place already for the next European election, which I think is also testament to how political advertising is perceived as a very important issue in this space. I think at a broader and more systemic level, we want to keep in mind that when we talk about disinformation, it's a very broad concept, and the risks and threats of disinformation are multifaceted. So of course, unfortunately, Ukraine is now experiencing one of the most grave examples of the impact that disinformation can trigger or can help to trigger. But if we look at the policy and regulatory tools, there's a variety of risks that disinformation can cause. That includes, of course, the fairness of elections, as well as, if we read the DSA, among the systemic risks, there's also the even broader, perhaps, concept of social cohesion. I think that when it comes to political elections in particular, we can interpret the European Convention on Human Rights legal system as protecting, alongside freedom of expression, also an interest in the fairness of elections, which I think might justify a little bit more of a rigor room when it comes to regulating the distribution of content in a way that is, on the one hand, respectful of freedom of expression, but on the other hand, also doesn't impinge excessively on the fairness of the election and the circulation of inaccurate information that might possibly be detrimental to these other interests. So I think when it comes to the specificities of political campaigns, authorities should consider the peculiarities of this context and how this is a separate interest protected by the ECHR legal system as a whole, and what type of actions might be taken that are bespoke for this specific context. Thank you.
Thank you. We only have 5 minutes left. I suggest that we proceed with the Q&A because there might be some questions. Could you please raise your hands if you have any questions? And yeah, yes, sure. You go first. And the speakers will be able to provide their comments when responding to your question. I have a question. If you are calculating the coefficient of critical thinking in population, maybe you'd like to ask one more question about education and awareness raising. You were talking about school kids. That's amazing. Cool. Great. I have also been thinking about that. But have you also thought about other groups of population? People of different age categories, working in different. The third question. Wait. Was the third question? Hello. It's a pleasure to see all of you here. I have the next question. I don't believe that you can exactly stop AI and its development, but when we're speaking about disinformation, first and foremost, we're talking about attention. Maybe the state that has more power and can convey some messages should be more active in using artificial intelligence to protect social conventions in their own societies, and at the same time use these technologies for certain hybrid conflicts, because I don't think that those are avoidable either. Well, I'll start from the final question. We will gladly look at all of your suggestions, and I think that the state is already using it. And yes, if you have any suggestions, you can submit them. Very to the point. Are there any more questions? Maybe somebody else would like to respond to one of the questions. Yes, the first question, could you please remind me what was about the coefficients? Yes, there was no coefficient of the critical thinking measure, but detector media did measure, I think, twice already, if I remember correct, the coefficient of media literacy. Of course, you can find some flaws in the methodology. You can find it on the Detector Media website. It was a sociological survey, and you can find out all about it. So please find the coefficient of media literacy, Detector Media. It's very interesting. It's a very comprehensive survey, and it is great that it is happening regularly, so you can compare how certain things impact. Yes, it is a sociological survey, very representative. Well, I was not part of the team that carried it out. Well, I think that you can check it on the website. The methodology description takes up 5 pages. Now, talking about other groups of people, not only school kids, not only children, but also adults. Of course, the first and foremost, in terms of how crucial it is raising awareness of older people. Because if we take Ukraine, older people are used to believing if something was shown on TV, if something was written in a newspaper, it is 100% true. And, you know, I have been combating disinformation for 9 years, and it still takes me time to explain my mom why some hearsay on Viber is false. And this is a critical matter. But I don't know, maybe somebody has an answer to that. How can we reach these vulnerable groups of society? Yes, maybe we should try doing that using TikTok. This is a good idea. And I would like to add something else to what the colleagues have mentioned. Ігор was talking about education, that education will help us, but I'd like to add that collaboration and flexibility will also help us. I'm talking about collaboration among all the actors, state fact checkers, say when Facebook, well, I'd like to also say that Stop Fake starting 2020 started collaborating with Facebook, with Meta as independent fact checkers, and Meta, with the help of artificial intelligence, finds some posts, some information, some content that is disseminated in an inauthentic way very rapidly. And our fact checkers, people, human beings, are analyzing this data, be it irony, humor, metaphors. They look at all it and they debunked it if the need be, and then they mark it as fake or manipulation. But I'm also speaking about collaboration between fact checkers, civil society, those who do that in the government. And I'd like to give you an example of when the invasion just started, at the onset of the invasion, which is a good example of collaboration between different players. Before the invasion, Russia was looking for some casus belli, for some pretext, and they were spreading different fakes saying that Ukraine was shelling some city in Donbass and killed a 5-year-old boy, and we managed to debunk this myth very rapidly. The Ministry of Culture organized a press conference. The representatives of fact-checking community spoke, media disseminated it, and this is how we managed to stop this disinformation attack. And this is not the only examples, you know, this flexibility and rapid response. I believe that it can be also very useful during elections, including at the global level, because we see that Ukrainian case can be used in examples. Yes, sadly, we already have to move on to the next panel. It is true that how rapid Ukrainians are responding and reacting to everything is something that our foreign colleagues can learn from. We'd like to thank our colleagues online. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's invaluable. And I would like to thank all those who have joined us offline. There are lots of questions, lots of different thoughts and ideas, and I believe that you'll be able to exchange them after the conference in an informal setting. Thank you. Thank you so much. It is true. Our first panel was incredibly interesting, and I believe that the second one will be just as interesting. Please don't leave. Don't leave. You can go grab some tea, coffee, or water. In fact, I now would like to invite the panelists for the second panel. And here we have both the online and offline speakers, Nikita Lukinets, founder at Open Ethics Initiative and CTO at Hello Biome. Also, Ales Petrov, CTO and co-founder at Reface, Valeria Myboroda. She is a researcher in the ethics of artificial intelligence at the Institute of Innovative Governance. Maxim Terashenko, CEO of the AI-based startup Mantis Analytics. And our colleagues online, Alexei Molchanovsky, he already made his opening remarks, who is the innovation head at UCU, as well as chairman of the expert committee on the development of artificial intelligence at the Ministry of Digital Transformation in Ukraine. Alexander Romanko, associate director, financial risk quantitative research at SSNC and adjunct professor at University of Toronto, and Andrei Kusi, CEO and co-founder at Last Data. Well, I guess I have mentioned everyone. In fact, we have an amazing panel about the technical aspects of AI. And I would like to start with the following question. We all have gathered here to understand how to tackle disinformation that is based on AI. But at the same time, how can we use AI to tackle it? But before we move on to respond to this question, it will be very interesting to hear more about what AI is, because unfortunately, not everybody understands the concept. AI is a very popular word combination today. It is used frequently, and AI has been studied for years now. And we will focus more on the concept of machine learning and neural networks, as well as generative AI, basically the one that is learning on the data, based on the data available. And I would like to give the floor to the first online speaker, Andrei Kusi, CEO and co-founder at Let's Data. Let's Data is a Ukrainian solution based on AI that in the real-time mode analyzes millions of publications on media and social networks to see the threats, which allows governments, companies, and civil society to prevent them. Okay, so Andrei is with us. Hi, Andrei. Yes, good afternoon. Good to see you. I have a question for you. Could you please explain to all of us how does generative AI work? Large language models, namely, and how does it analyze text and how does it generate information? To kick off, because thank you so much for the opportunity to speak. I'm sorry for any potential issues with connectivity, because I'm now in San Francisco with the Ukrainian delegation, and we are at the very heart of the artificial intelligence. But you know, the internet speed is the best in Ukraine. So going back to the generative AI, large language models, this is the neural network machine learning model that can analyze text, get necessary patterns from it, and then generate text that looks like something that a human being cannot tell apart from what was generated by a living human being. You can imagine a neural network like a human brain. It's like a system that has certain connections and can learn, can build new connections, and also understand what is the input and what the output is. And to create a large language model, let's imagine that we first take a brain of a child, and the child is only learning to talk. And the first step is given a very simple task. We give some text, and we're asking this model to prognose the next word. If, for example, we enter the word donate, the next word might be to the armed forces of Ukraine. For example, to teach the model like ChatGPT, you're using up to 3 billion pages of text. It's probably, if we use A4 sheets of paper, it would cover the distance between Kyiv and Lviv, central and western Ukraine. And the model is supposed to understand the part patterns in this text. Who is mentioned there? What is the semantics? What is the syntax? The model is supposed to learn all of that from the text to predict the next word in this text. Hence, we're training this model for tens of hours, and we get the first pre-trained model that knows how to generate the next word and understands text patterns really well. The information that is used are Wikipedia pages, books, websites, a pretty broad set of various information. And oftentimes there are mistakes there, it's imperfect, it's not checked, it's biased, it can contain disinformation too. Nevertheless, it allows the model to understand the structure of the language. After it has been done, this kind of models are not new to us. So we use that our phone when we're typing something can predict the next word, or Gmail is also predicting the next word, but they're pretty boring because they can only predict the next word. So you cannot do much with them. Then the next stage, for example, we take a task that's more complicated. Chat is more complicated than just a text and predicting the next word. Or we can further train this model to make some tasks that are more complicated. For example, to negotiate in a chat. To do that, we have to create the data set when people are inputting some prompts or requests. For example, how much should be donated to the armed forces of Ukraine? And there are some expected responses that this model is supposed to give. And then we're learning it. We're trying to teach it further to generate more complicated responses. And this is a pretty costly and complicated task to do that. That is why for a long time it was an imitator, because we could not create a data set big enough. And that is what was stopping them from developing. And then suddenly we tested and we realized that you don't necessarily have to give all of the input and all of the output to the model. It appears to be if you do one simple trick and ask a model to generate two options and then take a human being to say which they prefer, A or B, without correcting anything or amending anything, then we in fact can train model really fast, and the model will create something that we will prefer. And this is how we can improve its performance. For example, such models as some on Facebook, billions or millions of such requests are used. And here, we understand how these models work, because what they think is correct information or their views is defined by who fed them material. Who was this group of people that told them which text is better? For example, there was a recent research by Facebook, from Google, and different models such as ChatGPT or Llama were asked questions, and people try to understand their political agenda. And it was clear that Llama is pretty right, and the ChatGPT is more left-wing. And it all depended on the data set, as well as which people were entering information into the model. And we can work with these models in such a way, and we can impact them in such a way. And we need multiple research like that. And every time we have to look at whether we can address the bias that these models have, the bias that come from the original text that were used, and to further develop AI models. Well, I think that we could also mention how it all impacts disinformation. In general, that was supposed to be my next question to you. And I also would like to give the floor to one more speaker that I have mentioned, who is Dmitry Plashakov, entrepreneur, founder of Asabol. Andrea, I have a question to you. How does economy of disinformation work, and why do we need this breakthrough technology? And in general, what do we need to do for the LLM models? How emergence of LLM models impacts disinformation, and what should we do?
Thank you for this question. Well, yes, indeed, the issue of disinformation and the use of disinformation in order to counter your opponent and in using it in your smear campaign. Well, this technology is not new. It has been used for quite a while. There was the BBC study that showed that the compromising the reputation of one journalist would cost you $50,000, and compromising a politician would cost you $200,000, and it will take you 6 months. And therefore, these trials have been used before as well. But at this point in time, we see the acceleration and we see the broader opportunities for generation and for acceleration. These posts that were posted by bots in the past would be much more efficient if ChatGPT is applied. So those who were creating this information, they were preparing and they were using this advantage of surprise and the fact that it is not expected. So those who were supposed to fight back had this big disadvantage, as in order to detect new narratives, it took them a lot of time, and it took a lot of time to train new model, and it could have lasted for months. But now we could do that in minutes, within minutes. We as the team that has been working with the Office of Moldova President during the biggest Moldovan summit that took place in Chisinau in summer. And at that point in time, Ukrainian media environment was flooded with news that Zelensky is going to visit Moldova, so that Moldova should give some territories to carry out military actions and military exercise. And this information was fake, and on the day of the summit, this news migrated from Ukrainian media environment to Moldova media environment. The language was changed in terms of they switched from Ukrainian to Moldovan into Romanian, but the narrative was the same. The disinformation was the same. Within a few hours, we were able to warn the office of the president of Moldova, and they were able to respond. They were able to react. They were able to give the rebuttal of this information within 45 minutes. So at 5 p.m., these news migrated into a Moldovan media environment. At 6 p.m., there was the statement made by Zelensky. And at 7 p.m., President Sandu made her statement on this regard. It means that with the use of technologies, we could actually improve the speed of reaction, and we could react much faster because we don't have to spend weeks. It could be done within a few minutes. And we could do that before these narratives could spread on the wider audience. And in that particular case, we were able to nip it in the bud, and we were able to give the official rebuttal at the state level. Therefore, it was not disseminated. And it means that just 15 people are able to detect and to check dozens of thousands of narratives in various countries. Speaking about the economy and economic issue pertaining to disinformation. Nowadays, it's high time to create a so-called javelin to counter disinformation, as at this point in time, we could debunk disinformation with the use of technologies within minutes. Thank you, Andrea, very much. It was very interesting to listen to your insights, and we'll get back to you a bit later. But now I would like to give the floor to our offline speakers. I have a question to Nikita Lukanets. Once upon a time, you mentioned the book by Lawrence Lessig, who is very famous with his publications on the internet, and particularly I'm referring to his publication Code and Other Laws of Cyberspace. And according to him, the code could impact the society as well as the legal framework. And it says that there are 4 elements that regulate the behavior in cyberspace. And I was wondering how does this concept with 4 modeling forces, namely market architecture, law, and norms, could impact the disinformation scale? Thank you very much for giving me the floor. And, you know, I enjoyed our first panel that was called the legal regulation and legal aspects of artificial intelligence. Due to the fact that the regulation could be carried out not only by the means of law. According to Lessig, there are norms, and norms are these phenomena that are changing with time. For instance, we want everyone to cross on green light, but if people are not used to that, there is this culture of crossing the street when the light is yellow or even red. And this is when incentives, market incentives come to the fore. We could penalize or we could incentivize citizens for crossing on the wrong light or crossing on the green light. So we mentioned the legal regulation, the monetary regulation, but we haven't said anything about the barriers, as we could use the hedge and we could use defense on the side of the road. According to Lessig, creating some mechanisms by means of some software that would help us to understand what tools do we have in terms of the AI products, in what market verticals are they working, what kind of output they are generating, what kind of data were used as input data to train the AI, and who was training AI. All these issues could be regulated, and we could create the tools. And this is what some of our panelists are actually doing. And from the point of view of disinformation, what do we need? We need norms. What do we need? We need also the legal framework that we discussed during the first panel in order to regulate AI and also dissemination of disinformation. From the point of view of architecture, do we need some software? Well, let me go one step higher. Disinformation is one of the tools of influence. There is also misinformation. There is the information that is used as the shift in context, shift in narrative. And sometimes we are trying simply to disguise our true objectives from our competitors. So AI could be used also to counter these phenomena. Today, we were talking about synthetically generated content and all the other elements that pertain to the dissemination of content, as we should have a closer look at how the content is spread. Analytical machines could be used, and machine models could be used, classifiers could be used. Another way to look into it is to check how the synthetical counter narratives are spread, which is the part of this hybrid information fight. As we could compare the information that we have with the clusters that we see online. And thank you. I have another question. At this point in time, the AI systems are easily manipulated. As we talked about generative AI that generates manipulative content that could be used by some offenders, by marketers. How could we protect ourselves from vulnerabilities? And what could we do in order to use this technology in a responsible way so that the technologies are not used with some fraudulent purposes? This question is a big one. And I should say that first and foremost, we have the tools to increase the level of transparency of the systems, as this is the case at the market of foods and the market for pharmaceuticals and medicines, as we have the ingredients listed. To what extent we could create the table of ingredients for AI? That is what we are working on together with the Internet Genie Task Force in order to create this structural language to describe the systems and the responses from these systems, so that we could assess the situation not just in the legal sphere, but also to show that we are here and we could flag and label the content. And it's not just about the flag that this content was AI generated, but also to show it to AI that it is labeled. As at this point in time, generative language models are now trained with the content that they are generating, and that is a big issue. Thank you very much. I would like to remind you that Nikita Leganets is the founder of Open Ethics Initiative. This is the civil society organization that is working on the ethical standards at the level of developers and regulators. On that note, I would like to address the following question to Alexei Molchanovsky, who already introduced himself during the opening remarks. I was wondering about the following: the regulation of this misleading content that is used by some con artists, and should the state take any measures in this regard? Thank you for your question. I should say that the situation is so complicated that there is no quick fix and easy solution. Of course, we could try to label the content. We could add some watermarks, but you could immediately come up with some AI solution that would help you to redact that watermark. And then another question is, how do you put a watermark on the text? Even if you prove that the text was generated by ChatGPT or Bard, the user could regenerate it. Labeling could be a solution, but it requires a whole set of changes, and Nikita has already mentioned some of them: our practices and architecture. The previous panel debated about the critical thinking, and I do believe that it is highly relevant, and it is the most sustainable approach, as we should encourage critical thinking about users. They should be aware of the fact that you could not consume the content that you have no trust in. For instance, if we go to the store, to the supermarket to do groceries, we always check the expiry date in order to protect our health. The same pertains to the information consumption habits. And I know that it is not easy. If there are any educators among our audience, you would all agree that education takes time, and it does not happen overnight with wishful thinking. Critical thinking has been discussed for years now, but we do not see any considerable progress. Therefore, there is a need to create a framework, and for the platforms like YouTube that is now introducing the requirement for the content, if generated by AI, to be labeled accordingly. If non-compliant, the sanctions would be applied to the author of this content and to the person who posted it. And there is the problem with the AI-generated books. For instance, ChatGPT could write a book and you could generate some pictures with Midjourney. One of the most popular genre of literature that is used in terms of AI text generation, those are tourist guides. And Amazon recently prohibited their publishers to upload more than 3 books a day on their website, and this is quite artificial, and those people who want to trick you, the offenders, could create multiple accounts. we need to look into this agenda on the use of technologies that surround us to become the priority, and it would be pervasive. Starting from school, we should teach media literacy as we teach them to wash their hands. And of course, it should be scaled up to all the levels, using all the means that are available and that are at our disposal. Thank you. Today, I read the information that George Martin, together with other authors, filed a complaint against ChatGPT and those who were publishing the books by ChatGPT, and he filed a lawsuit. Actually, I have a question with regard to moderation and filtering this data. Is it actually possible, as we mentioned earlier, that machine learning is learning from the input data? The input data could come from the open source, for instance, Wikipedia. Is it possible to moderate data and to select the data that would be used for learning? But this creates a certain bias. Is it going to be an automated process or a manually handled process?
I don't know. These are such interesting questions, fascinating questions that you can talk about for hours. In terms of moderating, well, it might seem that it is great to have people who moderate it, but the question is, who are these people, how qualified they are, who checks it, who vets it? So that in this info stream, it is obviously that there might be some cases that really stand out, but the preliminary moderation might be done by the machine. And then again, during the previous session, there were several examples which mentioned that this moderation does not work in a proper way. But then, at the same time, there is this situation when we pay attention to some cases of unfair moderation. But fair moderation is something that we don't know about. Well, I cannot give you the exact numbers now, but we are using different postal services and we do not look at the spam folder a lot. But when you go there, we see how much garbage there is there. But the spam filter was not sure whether it was spam or not. And if you look at the statistic data, 90+% of the stream, it has to do with emails as spam, and spam filters of the email servers are dealing with it pretty good. And the content that we do not see on social media, well, the providers and social media platforms are probably already doing some good job because we do not see some of this content. This is regarding moderation. And we should understand that you can never strike a golden balance, because this is always the marathon aimed at improving it. Now, talking about training the data and picking the data, and Andrea Kosega also started mentioning that about how we pick this data. Okay, we want to be unbiased, but in fact, we are not unbiased. We all have some opinions and thoughts and views, and at a certain point in time, we'll reach an understanding that various models, they will be biased, and we will even want them to be biased. But for example, Andrei gave an example of Llama that is more, so to say, right-wing. Bard also could be characterized that way. He's more conservative, unlike ChatGPT, that mostly use online articles to learn. That is why it's more left-wing, more socialist-like, so to say. But look at what some larger countries are saying when they speak about regulating. For example, China says that in the context of AI regulation, they don't want the AI models that are used in China to stick to the values of the Communist Party. of China. But at the same time, the EU says that these models have to comply with the democratic values. So in the future, we might see that each country will have their own large language model that will be used in education, starting with middle school, and it will be trained based on the dominant values in the country. The same as we have local offices of Wikipedia and moderators that control and edit Wikipedia articles in a specific language. Just like that, we'll have the model that we're trained on the tags that are reflecting the views of a specific nation. And this is fine because we're human beings and we have different views, different communities have different views. That is why I do not expect that in the future we're going to get a single sterile model that will be very unbiased, because, you know, it will then simply be providing us facts 2 + 2 = 4, or giving you data about when a famous personality was born. But we want AI to become smarter and smarter. Thank you so much. Yes, it is true that we can discuss it forever. But let me segue to the next question and give the floor to Valeria Myboroda. In fact, we see many human-like qualities in machines, the so-called anthropologism. And the more we interact with computers, with AI, the more it seems to us that AI will understand us, that it is smart, and that machine knows how to think. And I like how Teresinovsky compared AI to the mirror of desires that was described in Harry Potter books. It says that it gives you everything that you're looking for, everything that you expect, and everything that you wish. And as they reflect each other, they will be striving towards the same conceptual state. So what do we do with this semi-erased borders between the AI and our perception? How can you make sure that when we are interacting with the AI, we're not only looking at our own reflection of our biases, reflection of our beliefs, especially when it pertains to disinformation? Can you hear me? Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much for the question. First, I'd like to say that one of the basic abilities for the human being is seeing in AI whatever we want to see. And of course, we're gonna say that it is similar to human beings. Say if I am interacting with a certain language model, I see that it operates with the same symbols that are familiar to me. And as a human being, I can perceive it as a human being. But it is important to mention that language imitation and interpretation of certain language symbols does not mean that it is the same as using the language, because this is specifically what differs human being from the machine, because we are consciously using speech. And I think that here we should also not forget about the culture. And if we see how artificial intelligence is represented in mass culture, most likely it's going to be something very ominous that has the conscience of its own and always wants to destroy the humankind. And I'd like to mention that this representation of AI in the mass culture is the concept that is exclusively theoretical, that neither philosophically nor technically is possible. And all of the artificial intelligences that we see now, different algorithms, Spotify, etc., all of it is a weak AI that works only within the algorithm. So it's not going to happen that accidentally ChatGPT will become conscious and will decide to destroy the humanity tomorrow. So going back to the question regarding restrictions, I think that there are two important steps that we have to make. The first one is, as Nikita mentioned, transparency. If we're creating certain AI, we should make sure that it is transparent. And it is not only about the code, it is also about how we present information to the people. If we're creating AI, we have to explain that this is code, it works in such a way, this is only language model, and it works within certain frames. It works according to certain algorithm, because sometimes people have very distorted perception of the AI, and it clearly raises certain myth around it. And there is a second step too, which seems more complicated, which is regulating AI, as we have mentioned previously, but regulating it from the ethical viewpoint. Say somebody has to be responsible for the end result that we get when interacting with the AI. Because what do we see now? OpenAI, for example, they are waiving any liability for what AI does. And of course, this is something scary for the people. And this also erases the border between machine and human beings. So we have to understand who will assume the responsibility. And how do you think? The machine that creates it, or should it be the company that developed the machine? Well, this is a very good question, because we basically have three ways out of the situation. First, company, the developers or a group of developers that are developing AI, they are the ones who are responsible for it. And the second option is the IT company who is responsible. And the third option is the most interesting. Giving the moral status to the artificial intelligence. What do I mean? That acts, for example, matters. For example, the Kyiv doesn't have it, so I can destroy, do anything what I want with it, but I cannot do that with a human being. I cannot do that because the person has some moral standing. And this is a pretty complex issue, because presently saying that we can give the rights to the AI that will be the same to the human rights, well, to give the moral status, you have to have conscience. Yes. And this is the most complicated question, because the present system is based on the basic statement that human has conscience. So basically, I cannot say, well, I'm sorry, but I function in a similar way as the machine does. And so far, we even come across difficulties. Can you hear me? Is my mic okay? With defining what consciousness is, because there were multiple different definitions and we cannot reach a consensus regarding it. And that is why, how can we give the moral status to the AI is a pretty complex issue, but I think that it can happen as AI is developing. What do I mean? As AI develops more and more, the more and more we should discuss its moral status. What can it do? And we should give it the respectful status. And if we can say that its way of thinking is similar to how the cows think, this is just an example, then it should have the same moral status. So that's how I would put it. Yes, this is a very philosophical discussion, but how about we don't dive into that about the moral status of the AI, because now we're talking about the weak AI that we have presently. And now I'd like to give the floor to the next speaker, who is Dmytro Pleshakov, who is the founder of Astavul. Hi, Dmytro. He's with us online. Dmytro, now when the AI is capable of creating content that can also confuse other AI systems, and we see that there are problems with revealing the fakes. Who decides what is truth and what solutions are there?
Greetings, dear colleagues. Thank you for your question. And I should start with broadening the context of our conversation, as it is important with regard to answering this question. When we are talking about AI, and we say that AI equals large language models, GPT, etc. And disinformation means fake news. But I do believe that both these terms exist in a broader context, as when we are talking about artificial intelligence, and humanity is now encountering it for the second time. And we are not talking about the first time. The first encounter that we actually lost, the algorithmic revolution, as all the network works in the following way the content is demonstrated and the engagement with this content takes place. The social networks work like this, but it has its side effect as it is feeding our biases and creates our bubbles. So AI that is deciding what to show and what not to show. And this is very important because as if it decides what large audiences would see. As I could generate an image in Midjourney or in ChatGPT and show it to my friend, that is not a problem and that is not a topic for a conference. But when we have something that gives it a boost, then we have a problem, and it pertains to influence operation, meaning the information campaigns that could change the perceptions of millions of people. This is something that we should counter, be disinformation or not, as in many cases, half-truth or 1/4 of truth could be as dangerous as 100% of fake information. Over here, we are discussing the fact that some of these notions could have very high impact, and we do not understand how it works completely. Therefore, the challenge of LLMs like ChatGPT and others is that they could have the feedback loop from this algorithm on content distribution. ChatGPT could give us the text, could generate text, but at certain point in time, ChatGPT could be connected to social network, and at the point in time when it understands that the content enjoyed this amount of likes, that could become a problem. And if I need to solve the problem, how do I generate the text that would pass through YouTube, Facebook, TikTok algorithms and make it to the target audience in order to change their views? And when AI is used to that, we would have to address this big issue. And it seems to me that this is the biggest existential challenge that we have to tackle at this point in time. And currently, we need to speak about the content distribution. What do we do in terms of spreading the content? And I see the light at the end of this tunnel. Firstly, in this new world, there is a new currency, and this new currency is trust. And good news is that it is very difficult to forge. It's very difficult to counterfeit trust. If you want to write an article that looks like from a journalist from New York Times, it will take you only 10 seconds with a ChatGPT, but to have this credibility level, it takes 200 years or the number of years this media outlet exists. If I am an account in Facebook, I am my story, my history, the patterns and connections that I have, the friendships I made, and this pattern is very difficult to forge when some bad actors could generate some good information and try to spread this information. They face the problem of sharing it organically and spreading it quickly, and all the defense mechanisms are less expensive than offense mechanisms. For instance, it cost me 1 year to create the account that looks good, but it loses trust within very short time frame the second it posts disinformation. Therefore, this asymmetry helps us as the protection mechanism, and it helps us to fight back. Therefore, transparency matters, transparency of the accounts and the regulation of accounts on social networks so that the content it should be clear who is posting the content. And distribution, the ways of spreading disinformation, as disinformation is spread in the other way compared to the organic content, and we need to use the algorithms to discern these ways of spreading disinformation. And now we see that journalism is on the rise. 10 years ago, some people were saying that we are on the brink of the death of journalism, but currently it's vice versa, and trust is the essence of journalism. As journalists are now back in the game, all these stories about trust and understanding of distribution, they exist, but the knowledge is dispersed. Someone is an expert on NATO, someone is an expert on Facebook, someone is an expert on Twitter, and there is a very low level of consolidation. There are no recognized protocols for the exchange of information, and we need to decrease the time to respond to this information, and in its turn, that would help us to increase the transparency. Thank you, Dmitro. I have a lot of questions to you, but now probably I would like to ask my question to our next speaker, and then we will get back to our previous speakers. And now I would like to bring the following topic. We are joined here today by Oles Petriev. He is co-founder of Reface, the company that is well known to many of you, that was more popular at a certain point in time than TikTok and Amazon. Oles, we have the question with regard to deepfakes and AI-generated deepfakes. I'm sure everyone has heard about this phenomenon, but if not, could you explain how it works? What is the mechanism of deepfakes? How do they work, and how are they taught? Well, thank you for your question, and let's start with the terminology. Deepfake means that this is the visual content that is created with the aim to mislead someone. And the artificial neural networks were used while generating this content, or not necessarily. There was this manipulation with information, and the trust in visual information is higher than the trust in simply audio. And deepfakes existed for hundreds of years, if not thousands, but recently the technologies allowed us to create them much faster. And the fact that we have these technologies now is a good thing, because my company Reface made a lot of effort in order to decrease the impact of deepfakes on the consciousness of people, because there is only a small share of citizens who know that Photoshop exists, and Photoshop is a weapon that you can use to destroy countries, and and any elderly lady knows how to use it. You just click it twice, and then you could create a picture. And Photoshop is just a Photoshop. At this point of time, many people have already heard about deep fakes, about these technologies, and we know that they could be used to create some fake porn. And we decided that this is a terrible misuse of technology that has these high prospects and has creative value. The only thing is that this technology was not used as a commodity, and it was not commercialized. So we decided to streamline it so that any person, regardless of the user experience, could get within few clicks the videos with the faces being changed. After 5 billion videos created with reface technology, it's not that difficult to surprise anyone with the faces being changed on the videos. Even my grandma, if I show her the video of my face instead of the face of Zelensky on speaking from the rostrum in front of the audience, she would not be surprised. She would simply ask me, how did I make this video? It means that this technology could be used like this. But I would like to add to what Dmytro has said. The biggest threat is not just the manipulation of visual data or generation of text. This is the use of automated optimization algorithms with the access to open data, with the feedback loop in terms of the perception of the audience. The language models are neither good nor bad. We could train LLMs on larger data sets. Even if we could collect all the data that were generated by humanity, at a certain point in time, all the language models would be able to simulate the way people communicate by means of words, by means of visual and audio means. The model itself is neither good nor bad, but we see that with LLMs, we could create agents. Agents meaning that when we ask LLM to behave as a therapist or to behave as a comedian or as a politician, and in this role, LLM is modeling the behavior of a certain role or a certain profession, but it is not autonomous at this point in time. As long as you are telling ChatGPT to speak as your therapist, it will talk to you as your therapist. But after this conversation, it will be over. But after 2024, with the elections taking place in so many countries worldwide, we will see what would happen when language models become autonomous. So when agent has access to limited resources that allow it to exist for certain period in time. And the task of this agent is to provide for its existence. And this will be digital life, self-sustain the mechanism that would have the mechanisms of self-replication. This is the stage of the development or invention that is as important as nuclear synthesis and nuclear energy discoveries. As we are approaching a stage when anyone could start a process that by means of self-streamlining, self-improvement could start these processes that were not created before, and neither religious nor communist nor other groups could have afforded it before. I'm not talking about consciousness, I'm not talking about Skynet, I'm talking just about the algorithm that is analyzing the efficiency of accumulation and redistribution of resources, in our case, money, energy, trust. And that is why we should be very much aware of the efficiency of our institutions and the credibility of these institutions, since that will be the decisive factor of whether the internet would survive or whether it would become the medium where any bad actor would be able to exploit any social institution, starting from the state ending, whether media or social or economic structures or institutions, and we will see that within the next year.
I wanted to ask you a question because the deepfake technologies played a role during the war. We remember at the onset of war, there were deepfakes with Zelensky, with Putin, that were spread online. And the videos that I saw, they were not yet that advanced, and you could tell that these are not real human beings. But now, looking at how rapidly the technology is developing, for example, the video with DiCaprio and Anna Ortega, who are dancing on YouTube, I saw that it actually was him, rather than a deepfake, because it's very realistic. So how were they using it during the war, and what risks that brings with it? And you have also mentioned the elections in 2024, and what impact might it have? Well, there will be a certain transition. The realization that we will need to accept the presumption of a lie, because an information by default is a lie. And given that certain types of information are pretty hard to make a fake of, such as videos or pictures back in the day, it seems now that it is harder to fake a touch. But who knows what's going to happen in 5 years? Maybe in 5 years' time, there will be a way of how somehow stimulating the receptors, and you will be able to even simulate a human touch. But by default, we have to understand that that we are going through the stage when we realize that any information by default is a lie, unless you have proven otherwise. And we're still now living with this illusionary perception that by default we can't trust the information. There still is such thing as figures of authority, and most likely something was broadcasted on TV, then probably it is true. And especially when we're looking at older people who trust anything that's broadcasted on TV, we laugh at them. And I think that people have a great tool. Not everybody likes it, but it is easy to use to improve the level of media literacy, which is shame. None of us likes to be shamed publicly. And this is a thing, probably the only thing that can work for different age categories, including for older people who are not that good with technology. When a person starts spreading disinformation because they have a poor level of media literacy, when it's obvious that they have disseminated false information, the person looks stupid. And none of us enjoys looking stupid. And if we try understanding how can we use shame as a tool to basically vaccinate people from unhygienic interaction with information, I think we will be able to severely decrease this period when people stop trusting everything. Because in 5-6 months, you'll see that each of you will feel as if I cannot trust anything that's posted online. Even when filtering information, a year later, we will understand that the only way for us to perceive any information and somehow trust it is to rely on AI, information immunity, because the velocity of creating new information that looks very true, not necessarily by people with the help of AI, but the information that is created by autonomous agents who are creating it just for the sake of survival. I can create an LLM agent that has a key to ChatGPT API, has several bugs to work with some virtual machine, to write several lines of Python code, and if I have a sufficient number of such agents, and I set the rules that say that only those who are using cryptocurrencies or those who can provide for their functioning, well, the practice shows that Darwin methods work really, really well with prompts. Even if you're, so to say, are not training the model, you don't have to retrain the LLM so that you could create agents that will be self-replicating and will be learning how to more efficiently break our communication protocols, because everything depends on our communication protocols, and we might see how a huge number of agents will penetrate it, and they will be very human-like, but they will not be humans at all. They will not have human restrictions, but they will have access to a large number of opportunities. Yes. Well, yeah, the same as during the first panel, as we have discussed, we need to increase the level of media literacy. We have to think critically, and we might stop trusting everything that surrounds us, and we will be doubting everything, but nevertheless, we have to double check everything. And what about technicalities? Is it possible to create some kind of the automated system or a program that will be double checking whether this deepfake is actually a deepfake rather than a real video? For example, I read that Intel is developing, maybe they have already developed a system that will help them discover the veins on a person's face or their neck, because it says that veins help you understand whether this is a deepfake video or not. All the approaches in detecting and guaranteeing that something is a deepfake or is not a deepfake is not the dead end, but this is a very harmful path to walk. Trying and constructing reliability of the information source based on whether there are certain characteristics or there are non-characteristics of AI tools is like walking in a wrong direction, because 50% of the emails or texts now look like as if ChatGPT was used, and oftentimes this is a text that was written by a person, but they just in case decided to use ChatGPT to polish it. So is it a fake or is it not a fake? I'm making YouTube videos. It's like an assistant. Yes, for example, I am producing content. It's creative. I'm editing videos. And while doing that, I'm using some elements that were generated with the help of the runway ML, where a certain video, well, basically I use some AI to edit the video. So is it true or false? So true or false should not depend on which tools are used. And the correlation between a certain tool and truth, substantiated by whatever was said by a large company, is the worst thing ever. Let's assume Google or Intel tomorrow presents an amazing technology that allows you with 100% guarantee tell the difference between deepfake and non-deepfake, be it a text, be it a video, etc. And let's assume this technology really works. There's not even a single thing that it can not detect. The best experts are working on it, etc. And the service is being used more and more and more. There are more and more users. Then different media outlets such as Times also start mentioning that they use this system to verify the data. The system accumulates a certain level of trust from the users, and then on Darknet or at GitHub, there is an approach that does not contain artifacts based on which the system can say whether it's true or false. What happens then? In the first case, when we do not have unified, irreliable system that says if it's true or false, and a visual content is potentially a lie. And we should always approach it critically and understand that if I believe this, I might look like a fool when it appears to be fake. But when there is this big reliable verification technology, as soon as there's something that can interfere with this large system, it can make a video that will, this piece of information will not be like a deepfake of Zelensky who looks very realistic, but rather a video and clearly that it will be quickly discredited in 1 to 2 days. Everybody will realize that yes, Google now cannot identify everything with a 100% guarantee, but all the harm that will be done due to abusing this reliable technology will only lead us to the dead end, and the creation of this unique verificators are a bad thing. Well, probably the only solution then is not trusting and double checking everything and realizing that everything is a lie unless you have proven otherwise. And proving that something is not a lie is a process that requires a lot of energy. You either have to invest your time, your thinking, but this resource is limited. The resource of certain agents who will be able to generate the information that your brain won't be able to process all of it, to process this huge pile of information. That is why we'll have to create the personal immunity, the system that comprises the same agents, but that are optimized and that work as my personal information immunity that filters information depending on my beliefs, based on the fact that I can be exploited to further spread this disinformation that will mitigate that it will impact my image and that I will have to pay money for. I'll have to invest certain kinds of energy so that it would work on the background. And those people who will not be investing their resources into that basically will become, well, how do I put it? People who are consciously refusing to be vaccinated when a very dangerous disease is spreading. It seems to be a matter of personal safety and health, but as we are all connected, this becomes the matter of collective safety and the matter of survival of the institutions the way we have them now. Thank you. And now we're going to give the floor to the rest of our speakers, and then we'll see what we do next. And I would like to give the floor to Alexandra Manko. He's from Toronto. Hello. And the question is the following. We have already talked about the fact that AI makes decisions based on certain statistical models and probabilities that were collected from large data sets online that can contain both true as well as misleading information. Of course, this opens lots of opportunities for creativity, but at the same time, there are certain challenges. There are different chatbots with artificial intelligence that can also create hallucinations. Some results that are based on combination of misleading and factual information. So, taking that into account, when chatbots are combining true and false informations, which safeguards and strategies can be used by tech companies to make sure that the results are precise and to still make people rely on this.
Thank you, Anna, for your question, and I would like to thank you for having me at this event. I agree with some of the statements that were made here, and with some I would disagree, but we need to bear in mind that it is all based on the probability. The AI systems work within the frames of probability. And how could we think of a ChatGPT or other LLM? It is trained on the data sets, that already have some bias, starting with the fact that some of the input data are data for the past few years, but the data for the past 50 years are fewer. Therefore, they do not make it to this input data sets, or are represented to a lower degree, which means that you could see that and what happened 5-10 years ago, it is not reflected in AI. I tried it myself. So if you want to remove data that are inciting violence, you see still some biases and some hallucinations embedded, and it is basically impossible to get rid of all of them. And we should bear that in mind, despite all the resources that we are spending on this effort. Talking about the probabilities that are used by these LLMs, if we ask the same prompt, we know that the answers would be different, and these texts and these videos are generated. Therefore, every time, even if the conditions are the same, there is still the factor of probability inside the system that would gives us the different result, even if we are using the same prompt line. How could we interact with such systems? First and foremost, we are getting certain sentiments, certain emotions about what we are asking. And it could be propaganda. The information that we get from the system could be propaganda. For instance, Russian narratives are so widespread in the input data, as Russia was producing this huge amount of propaganda that are prevailing in the data sets. Therefore, when the model is being trained with this collective sentiment to certain person or about certain event, this collective sentiment would be around the data that are more represented in the input data set, in that training data set. What could we do about it? We need to try and do something, but it costs a lot. Now, you could use some fake news or disinformation for training your model, and you know what the result is. Unless said that it is difficult to check the information. Well, it could actually happen, although it is difficult. I remember these discussions 10 years ago in IBM, when we were able to have the scale of from 1 to 10, whether the information is fake or not, if it's spread, it's fake. And this is about probability, but these methods are not used widely, and they are not used as the plugins, although they exist. They have not become the mainstream. Therefore, it's difficult to discern false information from true information. But what could we try and do? We could clear the data. How can we do that? We could do that using algorithms, not manually, but of course that could help us to solve the issue only partially. We should also work on trust between the sources that are generating this data. We need to use the cross-references and to have the automated checks of the information to see whether the image or the text or the video is generated by AI, or And you know, at this point in time, I don't think that it is so important whether the content is generated by AI or by human being, because both humans and AI could generate fake content, false information, but we need to work with the data that need to be well balanced, and it will take a lot of effort and it may take a lot of time. Thank you. You mentioned the moderation of data, and who is going to carry out that moderation? Speaking about bias and the war in Ukraine, propaganda on the internet, and we have a lot of articles that are in favoring Russia. How do we choose the media outlets that we could trust? And there are so many chat forums like Reddit that give us a lot of information that our AI is learning from. So who is supposed to moderate this process in order to avoid the bias, as for sure a human being is deciding whether the sources of information are true or false, credible or not. I do not think that it is possible to do it manually. We have seen this scandal with OpenAI when they were hiring people in Africa, paying them low and asking them to manually clear the violence-related content. It takes a lot of time to do that manually, and it costs a lot as well. Not a single company would do that manually, because that would delay the launch of GPT 4.5 for a month. What could help clearing the data with algorithms and balancing this process? We understand the representative sample, and we do understand how they could be checked. I hope that there will be the algorithms created that would help to find to strike a balance in data, and to discern which data should be removed and which data should be balanced, and maybe we do not have enough data from one country and have too much data from other country, for instance Ukraine and Russia, as Russia was generating a lot of fake news that are predominant, and to strike this balance in a data set from one country regarding the other country, that would be really interesting. But it may take a lot for us, and I don't know whether we would be able to catch up with the development of generative models themselves, be it the text or the image. But I think that this is the only thing we could do, the automating balancing of these biases and data sets based on the reputational cross-references. This process is a difficult one, and I do understand that we will have to think about this for years to come, as now we are living under Wild West conditions in this market of disinformation. We'll have to solve it on our own, all with our personal agents. But I hope that hopefully at a certain point in time, AI would be helping us to combat fakes and propaganda. I was thinking about disseminating disinformation and the media being used to learn. And we know that there are many content makers and bloggers who are using AI to generate articles that are then posted on social media without being checked for propagating disinformation. Then AI uses these posts to learn, and this is the vicious circle. And in this particular case, we should look into media literacy and understand that we have to be responsible citizens and have to be responsible in terms of our work and use, and in our use of the assistance. Thank you, Alexander. And now I would like to give the floor to our offline speaker, Maxim Tereshchenko, who is CEO of the AI-based startup Plantis Analytics. I would like to hear from you, how can we monitor the media environment in the real time? And my second question is countering disinformation with the use of AI. How can we solve this problem locally or globally? What could Ukrainian IT community do about this issue? Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your question. I would like to start with the second question, as it seems to be more important. At this point in time, we are living under the war that is intense, and informational warfare is an important front line. No other country had to face these high intensity of attacks that we are experiencing every minute, every hour. This is the first informational war globally. That is a serious challenge, but on the other hand, it is an opportunity, as it gives us the unique chance to act here and now, and to create the think tank and the core of informational resistance. So we are cooperating with the Taiwan organization, and some of its members came here, and we were asking, and they are asking us how they could prepare to the war that is about to break out. This is what we can do. We could work on our skills, and then we could teach others. Speaking about the war, the best technologies were invented on the battlefield, as it is difficult to come up with a revolutionary solution outside. The license costs hundreds of thousands of dollars per user in the systems, and these systems were tried out in Ukraine, and they were proved inefficient. Why? Because they were not adjusted to this high intensity of information warfare, and they were not adjusted to our local content. This system was not trained on Ukrainian, Russian, and mix of both languages at the same time. Any system breaks down, and we have the task. We have 300,000 IT guys who could be mobilized and who could be engaged in this kind of activity. So we needed to forge the connections with the state, with the government, in order to become this IT hub globally. With regard to your first question, well, yes, indeed. Why are you asking me about real time? If we look into Ukrainian media space, media environment, where do we get information from? Telegram, the news outlets and their websites post the information 2-3 hours later, as we are monitoring constantly. And in some cases, the situation is changing every minute. I am sure you all remember the cases when you are scrolling down the news feed on Telegram and you do not understand what is actually happening. We talked a lot about artificial intelligence today and how it works, but it is important also to use it as a product. It has to be a system that is highly responsive and responsive in the real time. As we talked to the Western journalists and newsmakers, as we mentioned, the verification of data, This verification for newsmakers has to take place quickly, as they have the responsibility. And the New York Times, for instance, they are shaping the public opinion, and the information they are posting shapes the opinion of the public. They have to make decisions, and their attention is in this sphere at this point in time. And what they write could influence the decisions crucial for our state, for instance, whether the weapons would be provided to Ukraine or not. So this mechanism has to work in an efficient way, and it has to be working in the real-time basis. Well, we are actually pressed for time right now, but I have the question to all the speakers, but primarily to Dmytro Pleshakov. Thinking about the market, imagine there is the product in the market that is generating less disinformation. Will it cost more? Will the price be higher for this kind of product? This is the question about the criteria that the users are using while selecting the solutions. Are they ready to pay for solutions that are more truthful? Thank you for your question. And this is the question basically that pertains to the role of chats like ChatGPT in on the use of media. First and foremost, this is the tool. AI is the tool that is used by content makers to generate content, and it depends on who is the content maker. If I'm a blogger, if I'm a New York Times journalist, I'm ready to pay more to get the high quality content, trustworthy content. But unfortunately, there are other types of content generators like Russian officers or Chinese officers, and as my colleague has said, currently creating a new LLM that is generating fakes, that is an easy task, and I have no doubt that Russians could have this technology. From this point of view, even if we have high quality product, it doesn't mean that malicious actors who have bad intentions are using other products, alternative products. Another interesting thing to take into consideration is interaction with content. There is character AI that is less known here in Ukraine, but this is the second most popular AI globally. ChatGPT comes first and character AI comes second. What is that? This is the place where you can create the virtual friend, a character, for instance, Elon Musk, or you could use some historical figure, and you could have a dialogue with this person. So your task is not just to generate text. You are there to talk to this assistant, to this friend, and he or she, and it. The character you created has an opportunity to influence you because you're talking for a while with this system. Therefore, communication is not just one-to-many, this is one-to-one communication, and this chatbot could also adjust the way it communicates with the others. And from my point of view, it poses a lot of threats and risks, as there should be some regulations and limits. In the EU, there is AI Act, and in China, for instance, this system could be completely banned because we do not have any visibility of what is happening in those chats, and we have no say in that. Virtual friend, you said. I have two questions with regard to that. Our our people are already used to this chatbot assistants, and it could create the situation where we are living in our homes with these black mirrors and our imaginary friends. And another question is the privacy. How much information are you ready to give away to this kind of friend, and for the privacy not to be breached and for this information not to be spread outside? As this is the big issue, and it has to be regulated both in Ukraine and globally. There are acts like Digital Services Act, AI Act, GDPR, and we are sharing the private information, and we do not know whether it will be used against us or not. Anything to add? Please go ahead.
I simply would like to say that this is a great doubt because people are sharing personal information, and this is a perfect tool for phishing. That's why in the cybersecurity world, there are multiple discussions about generative AI, because this is a new page. And moreover, not only people with low level of media literacy are sharing that, there were also examples when people were sharing sensitive corporate information to the OpenAI and generated some documents, and hence they revealed the commercial classified information. We discussed it with the colleagues from NATO, and it was a serious thing, and there were some incidents. That is why we are talking a lot about how do we deal with that, and this is a very valid risk. And now there are discussions on how to do that. Maybe our other panelists would like to add something, comment on it. Well, I can add a comment about the privacy. In 2016, they worked on an AI agent whose task was to do coaching consultations. The thing is that coaching is the model of interaction can be formalized really, really well, because you can formalize it really, really well with the help of the language. That is why we have developed a language model for that. By the way, in 2016, we launched a pilot project with NHS in the UK, National Healthcare System in the UK, which basically provides an insurance to people as well as healthcare services, and working with people who had who were chronically exhausted. People were sharing this kind of things with a very, very primitive technology, which back in the day was nothing like what GPT is capable of today, or even GPT-3. The risk of privacy, the risk of losing privacy is very, very high if you're interacting with them. So please keep that in mind. Well, the question was, so what do we do? Because we're talking about many scary things. Well, first, there is no universal answer to this question. I think that we can look at what multi-cell organs did when they have turned to them from the colonies, and when the system of collective immunity started to form. And I think that many things will be similar to that. But what can we do here and now? Invest resources and time into creating rapid and cheap open-end research agents. What do I mean? System that can be personalized, i.e. can be easily used on your phone, or at least be dedicated for one specific user that can work on a task that you delegated to, and quickly accumulate information. Say, I see a video or I read an article, I receive a message. And if there are systems that can rapidly, I mean within seconds, maybe minutes, tops, collect very representative information about this piece of content that I received, to make me choose whether I can rely on it or not, or for me to understand what is my next question, it should be always the human making the choice. We should not develop the systems that will make a choice regarding whether it is true or false, because if we do that, there will be a system that will be exploiting it so good that there will be 10 times more harm than good from it. And the biggest problem now is that the speed of content generation becomes way faster than the speed of our brain processing information and validating it. So we have to cut down the time between receiving the information and obtaining enough information based on which a person can reach a conclusion. Do I want to trust it or not? It is always a choice that has consequences, and increasing the level of understanding what kind of consequences it may lead to. That you can make a choice that you can trust this amazing meme, but the consequence can be that you'll lose your job, your reputation, your friends, everything, and this can happen in the future. Thank you. We have a question from the audience. Yes, thank you. I have the same question to those speakers who probably can reply. And the question is, what do we do? There were several suggestions. Well, obviously there are two approaches: a technical solution, balancing information or information streams, analyzing and detecting fakes. This is what Alas suggested, and there is the other side. And I think that this is what matters more in the context of the topic of today's discussion, which is social engineering. How can we impact people? How can we increase the level of their critical thinking? Or as Alas suggested, how can we use the feeling of shame? This is a cool idea, but the question is how? Or the question is, how can we increase the level of critical thinking? And by the way, I really like the question that was raised during the previous panel. How can it be measured? Because as it is known, if we do not measure something, we cannot control it. And it was weird to see how Mr. Shevchenko reacted to that. I would like him to also listen to their answers to this question. Nevertheless, my question is, what do we do? If I may, I would like to give a counter argument, because as soon as we start using shame as a tool of social impact or ranging, we start sticking to the Chinese model, the social score model. So I'd be very careful. Anything that we're measuring can also be used against us. And if shame is that tool that will be ranging people depending on their impact, it may lead to other consequences. For example, using your level of trust or your level of shame. It might also impact your purchasing capacity, your social connections, etc., etc. I would like to also add, if I may, we started with the question of data privacy, and now we're talking about what do we do about it. And it seems to me that opening all private data to ChatGPT is the same as standing at the city square and shouting out loud about all those private things. The more we use it, the more there will be companies that will be creating their versions of language models, their applications that will have their privacy policies. So you have a legal advisor based on the language model. Most likely they will have a different privacy policy, and you will be able to use your private data. But all of them are based on the models that are produced by large companies such as Google Bard, OpenAI, ChatGPT, or that are produced by Facebook Llama. And let us not forget that one of the important steps for model training is learning while engaging a human being. So human being is a prompt. and people participate in training the models. And we, as the users of the systems, if we look at these algorithms and look at what they optimize, if the user does not like or the user reports something as hateful or harmful content, this is a huge penalty for this model, right? Hence, we as the users have the chance, with the community have the chance to develop an ethical and moral standard for these models. If we look at how Wikipedia is moderated, Ukraine has an active community of Wikipedia moderators, and thanks to that, we manage to stick to our truth on Ukrainian language version of Wikipedia. So we have to have an active community of people who will be providing feedback and constantly using and exploiting this algorithm, the reinforced learning that will help us to shape this baseline model that will have the same values as we do. And then if we give this feedback, of course, without revealing large number of private data, later on the business, which will be developing their applications based on this model, will also automatically inherit part of our values. So this is one of the ways to impact and influence these models, giving them feedback and trying to push your values rather than simply put in all of their responsibility on the companies, even though, yes, they are responsible and they have to engage moderators in the right way and they have to set certain values. Thank you so much for your comment, Andrei. We're very, very limited in time. So probably the last comment. Okay, but please be brief because I see that 2 more people are raising their hands. Very brief to comment. The first one about privacy. And I was playing with board. I liked it more ideologically wise. So I tried to make it analyze me and I failed to do that. It refused by arguing that it cannot process private data of the user. And I was even glad when I saw that. But now regarding like that is similar to go into the city square and to shout in that data. But you know, if you have the basic OSINT data, you can find out where your friend had a cup of coffee in the morning simply by seeing the tags and by Googling some information. So in terms of the personal data, we need to also work on the culture because it is very distorted in Ukraine due to our totalitarian legacy. Because on the one hand, we do not want to sign a contract with the university when we have to share some private data. But on the other hand, we're sharing so much private data without hiding it on our social media profiles. So there are so many things that we have to think about. It is the same as we are being taught to not pick up things that we find outside when we're little. Good evening. Thank you so much for an interesting and important event dedicated to cyber security and AI. My question is the following. NATO and Western countries are supporting us, provide military support for Ukraine. You remember last year there was a lot of manipulation about Ukraine selling the weapon that is supplied. There was a publication in Financial Times and some other media outlets. What do we do so that the partners can trace and track whatever they provide us with so that Ukraine is open for the partners and saying, look, here's the equipment, it's in the front line. And we can also be open and at the same time we will technologically be integrated into the NATO countries. Well, I can't speak about that because we came across this disinformation campaign that Ukraine is selling the weapons supplied at the black market. And I don't think that the task of the information units is to track where every single unit of weapon is. We got the monitoring teams that come from the US, and this is a political component. But what can the information team do? And what did we do? Is analyze the distribution of this content before it was published by Financial Times. It was also available in other sources because it all started with the anonymous Telegram channel that was connected to Prigozhin. And this probably shows that Financial Times were misled. Well, if you're checking that entire chain. And now again, going back to the transparency, if we see where the information comes from, how and who are the actors that were engaged into this, there are way fewer questions raised. Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for all the comments. We're winding up, so you'll have up to 1 minute, and this will be the final comment.
Just a quick comment on my side to what Dmytro has mentioned. Not only the information is important, but also the reaction to that information, the response to it, how is it picked up and how it is spread. We were talking about the economy, and you know, we are creating the narratives and we are making them malicious when we are sharing the content that is not checked. And the first part of the analysis is to see what is the source of information, and then the second part of the analysis is how it was perceived in Ukrainian society and how we could counter malicious information. And the very last comment. The use of blaming and shaming as one of the tools to influence the behavior patterns in terms of media hidden. Not using blaming and shaming from the point of view of the state, of the government, but the use of the experience. Negative emotional experience. After the case with spreading the information that was misleading, using it as the vaccination against spreading it in future. If the person was triggered and the information was emotionally resonating and it was false, the moment you share it and when you read the comments on your Facebook page, you see not just the comments like this is a lie, but you see the set of facts with the automatic links that would give the other person the opportunity to draw the conclusion whether it was true or not. That makes a difference. And when you see that the person wasted his or her energy and only to have the trust decreasing, they would think twice before posting the false information. And it would influence on the patterns of what is socially acceptable and what is socially unacceptable. And careless spreading of information and sharing of information is something that should require the immune response. Thank you very much, dear participants. This is a very interesting conference, and we would love to continue this communication that we should wind up. Thank you very much for participating. This topic is obviously very important. So see you all in Lviv on the 6th of October. If you happen to be there, please attend. This event will be both online and on site. We will discuss even more interesting topics there. You will find the information about our conference on the webpage of our organization. I would like to thank our amazing speakers for this fruitful discussion. You are all amazing, and I'm very proud that we have as specialists in the sphere of AI, and I know that globally Ukrainian IT specialists, especially in the sphere of AI, stand out. And I already have some insights and some new ideas for the future discussions. As our speakers have already said, there are some ideas on some tech solutions. And thank you so much once again. And now we have time for informal communication with over a cup of tea or a cup of coffee. See you next time. We would like to thank our speakers online for being with us today.